The Baltimore Ravens may very well have 5 first-round picks at wide receiver catch a pass this season. But does that matter? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TTV Ravens Media, bringing Ravens content every single day. If you want to see that daily Ravens content, make sure the subscribe button down below, hit the notification bell, as well if you want to get notified every single time I put a brand new video out. In this video today, basically just talking about the Ravens wide receiver core and, this idea, this narrative that I've been seeing. I don't know if it's necessarily a narrative, but this cool stat that people keep wanting to bring up. Of the Ravens' first-round wide receivers. And, people had talked about it. It had been mentioned plenty of times, but then Jamison Hensley decided to write an article on it yesterday, so I want to give a shout-out. It was, re-brought to my attention by him. And so, if you guys want to check out that article on ESPN, go do so. It's titled 5 First-Rounders, Why the Ravens Wide Receiver Group Could Make History. Go check it out if you want. It's a decent article. I would recommend it. But who cares? I think there's so many things in the NFL that people pay attention to and don't pay attention to. And where people were drafted is by far the most over-talked about thing in sports. I think it is. Now, when it's draft time, absolutely talk about it. If you want to talk about draft steals, busts, all that stuff, I have no problem with that. But, it is a constant throughout the year. They're just talking about a player. They're like, this guy ended up going in the 5th round, or this guy was a former first-round pick, when you sign a player, right? And the Ravens signed Laquan Treadwell this season, and it was like, former first-round pick Laquan Treadwell. And the only reason that they do that is because that's the only thing they've done in their career. Right? When you sign a star player, right? They don't say former first-round pick Jamar Chase. They're going to say All-Pro. They're going to say Pro Bowl, right? They're going to say, you're talking about Julian Edelman. They're going to talk about, Super Bowl MVP. They're not going to say, what round they were drafted in. Because the round that you were drafted in is an analysis of what people thought of you before you were drafted. That's what it is. And I'm here to say that where you were drafted and who you were before the draft does not matter. It doesn't matter. I don't care. Like people look back and they say, how could anybody pass on this player? I think the best example for wide receivers is, how could anybody take Hollywood Brown? First, that's the most recent one, especially for Ravens fans. How could anyone take Hollywood Brown? There were guys like A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel. All those guys were referred to. And the Ravens decided to take Hollywood Brown. How dare they? What could they do? Hollywood Brown was a better, more complete prospect than those other players. Did they turn into better players? Yes. But the NFL draft, probably more than any draft in sports, maybe NBA, maybe MLB, could be the top, but has more busts than anybody else. I'm not even saying Hollywood's a bust. I don't think he's a bust. But the NFL, the way that drafts are done, the NBA draft was last night, and I think it's a great example because you look at things like Drew Timme went undrafted. Sonogo out of UConn went undrafted, who just won the national championship because he was the best player. But probably in March Madness last year. And it's like, okay, why were they undrafted? They were clearly the best players in college basketball last year, but they weren't the best prospects. Why? Because people draft based on potential. They don't want somebody, and I've talked about this before. I've made TikToks and YouTube shorts about it on Play Action Football, talking about how the NFL is more focused on getting potential rather than having starting quality players or solid backups. Because if you look at it, Ezekiel Elliott is better than a lot of the backup running backs in the NFL and better than some starters in the NFL at the running back position. There are some quarterbacks that would easily be backups in the NFL over maybe guys like Malik Willis or over guys like Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. There's probably guys out there that may be better currently, but instead, everyone focuses on the potential. And so, when you get drafted, a lot of the first round, back end first, typically not the top 10, is based on maybe they're not the best player in college, but they have crazy potential. Maybe they're a freak athlete. Maybe they, just showed flashes. Look at Odafe Oweh, right? Odafe Oweh was not one of the 32 best college football players his final year at Penn State, but he showed potential. And so the Ravens drafted him. So you look at the wide receivers, and it's just like, all right, the Ravens now have 5 wide receivers that showed potential in college. That's what that's telling me. That is what that is telling me. When anybody says the Ravens have 5 first-round wide receivers, though, all that tells me is they had 5 football players that either showed flashes or were really good in college football. Some of them panned out. Odell Beckham Jr., I think, is the best example of those players, right? I think he panned out the most. But, then they have players that didn't pan out. Laquan Treadwell. They have players that maybe they didn't turn into a superstar, but I would say that they still panned out. They made it in the NFL. I think Nelson Aguilar has proven he's an NFL wide receiver. I think Rashad Bateman, even though he's only played, a select number of games, I want to say a dozen games, just around a dozen games. I think he's shown, he belongs here. But when you look at the best receivers ever, they're not all first rounders. Heck, you look at the best receiver in the last 15 years. He wasn't a first rounder. His name was Antonio Brown. And you look at Antonio Brown coming out of college and you say, hey, what did he do well? And you're like, oh, was he a great athlete? Was he super fast? No, not necessarily. Oh, was he insanely, technically savvy coming out of college? Was he unbelievable? Did he have great hands? You'd be like, nah. He was good in college, but he wasn't anything crazy. Because most of the NFL, I'm going to go on record and say this, most of the NFL is based on development. That's what it is. So when anybody says, oh, former first-round wide receiver, it's just okay, so that means that they were a first-round wide receiver and they didn't develop. Because if you ever get anybody that went to a Pro Bowl, they call him a Pro Bowl wide receiver, quarterback, corner, whatever. They don't call him former first-rounder. Former first-rounder just means they didn't pan out. So I don't like when people say, is it a cool factoid? Sure. But in reality, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how you play. It doesn't matter where you got drafted. Now, for the players, does matter. Why? Contracts. They get more money if you're drafted earlier. If you're a football player, you want to get drafted. You want to go in the first round. You want that 5 years. You want that guaranteed contract. You want all that stuff. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't matter in terms of roster building, because it does, getting that 5th-year option for a first-round wide receiver. But the Ravens didn't. They only drafted 2 of their wide receivers. It's beneficial for Zay Flowers, and it's beneficial for Rashad Bateman. Those are the only 2 first-round wide receivers that matter to the Baltimore Ravens, that they were drafted in the first round. Why? 5th-year option. That's the only reason. So, them being on the team does not mean, they're going to be used more than Devin Duvernay. They're going to be used more than James Prochet. They're going to be used more than Tylan Wallace. They're going to be used more than Dante Demas or any of the other wide receivers that the Ravens have competing for that final roster spot. There's 30. But looking at where players got drafted, if they got drafted 6, 7, 8 years ago, Like, why? Why is that something that's pointed out outside of during the draft, right? When Zay Flowers got drafted, if someone wants to mention, wow, the Ravens all of a sudden now have four, because at that point they had four first-round wide receivers. Then they signed Laquan Treadwell. I was like, oh, they signed Laquan Treadwell. If you want to mention it once, now they have five first-round wide receiver or former first-round picks. But it's like, who cares? That's a label that, I mean, frankly, it doesn't matter, because when you look at the all-time greats, how many of them were first-round picks versus how many of them were second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth? Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Antonio Brown. Heck, Kurt Warner went undrafted. Like, looking at where players were drafted, it doesn't mean that they're better. It means that they showed either more potential or they were better in college. But I'm going to give an example in life that I think pertains to this. If you guys are out of high school, if anybody's watching in high school, no worries. You'll get to this point after high school, and you'll realize what I'm talking about. But there's always cool people in high school, right? There was always, the really popular people or whatever. 5 years after high school, 10 years after high school, 15 years after high school. If you're going around saying, I was the dude, or I was the man, I was the shiz, whatever you want to say, in high school, bro, people are going to look at you like a weirdo. Like, nobody's going to hear that and be like, oh, really? Nice. I gotta dap you up. Like, I gotta meet you. Yo, what's going on? What do you do now? That is not how that conversation is going to go. But all of a sudden, because that's like where you were drafted, is how cool you were in high school, right? What you were like in high school, that's the stage, right? Because life is what matters. What you do after high school, maybe it's, oh, I had a successful career, or, oh, I got married, I fell in love, I had a family, or whatever it is. Those are the important things, I would say, for most people. It's not about how cool you were in high school. And again, being cool in high school, I got no problem if you were cool in high school. You might be a cool dude now. I got no problem with it. I'm not trying to, bash on anybody that's cool in high school. This isn't some 6-year-old revenge story coming out of me. No. I got no problem if you were cool in high school. I got no problem if you were drafted in the first round. But if that's your calling card, then maybe you haven't done very well. So, describing the Baltimore Ravens wide receiver room as having first-round wide receivers, I don't like that. Because that, in and of itself, is, I feel, negative, because it's not bringing up their current accomplishments. It's not saying they have 3 Pro Bowl wide receivers. It says they have 5 guys that were seen to have had potential, but most of them didn't pan out. It's just something that I think I would want to avoid and not talk about, because it doesn't matter. Whenever you bring up, you look at who's going to end up winning Rookie of the Year, whether it's offensive or defensive or whatever. You look at last year, and what was the race down to? It was down to a cornerback that went top 10, and it was down to a 5th round or 4th round cornerback, day 3 cornerback in Tariq Woolen versus Sauce Gardner. That was the race. It was between those two guys. And then you look at the offensive player of the year, and it was Brock Purdy, the last player in the draft. He didn't end up, I don't think he was a finalist, but Kenneth Walker was in the conversation for a lot of people, who wasn't the first running back drafted. He was the second. He drafted not in the first round. He was a day 2 pick. You look at the wide receivers. You had Garrett Wilson, who ended up winning it, first round player, but it's not like it was all first rounders. It's not like it was all, day 1, day 2 guys. So it's just like where players were drafted. Again, yes, it talks about potential. Yes, it talks about benefits and positives about potential. And when you're really young, I'm not against it, bringing up a guy as a former first round player, right? But the first rounders that the Ravens have, They were drafted in, let's see here. I've got the article pulled up. I think it does bring it up. I mean, they have Odell Beckham Jr. drafted in 2014. Obviously, Bateman and Zay Flowers were drafted recently. But 2015, Nelson Aguilar, and 2016, Laquan Treadwell. Dude, you've been in the league for 7 years. I think we don't need to talk about where you were drafted. If you want to say former Viking, go for it. Because then it's like, oh, I remember him playing there. Instead, you're talking about the draft? It's just like a bad thing. Like if I'm an NBA player, if I'm an NFL player, and someone ends up bringing up drafted here when I sign somewhere new, or, this is where they were drafted, this is how early they went, that means I haven't accomplished very much. Right? Like, I think the best example in the NBA, when Markelle Fultz ended up going to the Orlando Magic, what was it? Former first-round pick Markelle Fultz. It wasn't current Sixers star. It wasn't all-star Markelle Fultz. It was former first-round pick. Ben Simmons, on the other hand, who failed out miserably. Right? Is he brought up as former first overall pick? No, he's not. He's brought up as all-star because he did something. First round pick is the lowest form of flattery that you can give someone. It's a borderline insult to what they've done in their career. Because it's saying that your career, the biggest thing that you did for it, was before it even started. Like if you get if you're working your everyday job, right? And maybe you're meeting a new client, or maybe you're meeting your boss's boss or whatever. And I went to Cal Poly, so I'll use this as an example. If they bring up, hey, this is McConnell from Cal Poly, and then they, introduce me to John Smith, CEO of the company, I'm like, dude, why are you introducing me as from Cal Poly? Now, if they introduce me as that, hey, this is McConnell, he's a sales associate. All of a sudden, that's my role. And it's like, oh, boom. Like, they respect what I'm doing, right? Or accountant, McConnell. Or TTB, McConnell from TTB Ravens Media. If they introduce me as that, I'll be like, yes. Like, they're respecting what I've done rather than what I did before I got there. I don't know. That's my thoughts on this. It wasn't necessarily fully about the article. It was just me talking about, more widespread about the draft and how players are perceived. But, again, I'm trying to get into doing more just overall content rather than just only the Ravens. I do have some good videos that I'm excited to make. And I'm probably going to make some videos on Summer League because I love talking Summer League. It's one of my favorite events of the entire year. May talk some baseball as well. So let me know if there's any topics you guys want me to discuss. Thank you all so much for watching. Subscribe for daily content, and I will see all of you again tomorrow.